If you're neurodivergent, have a chronic illness, or consider yourself disabled, and you are sick and tired of people telling you to just think positive, change your mindset, because if you focus on all the bad stuff, that's all you're going to attract, then this podcast is for you. You're listening to Feathermane Soul Wisdom, a podcast for those looking to rediscover their wild spirit in spite of life's challenges. If you're living with a chronic illness or neurodivergent or consider yourself disabled and you're looking to connect with your own inner untamed essence, then this show is for you. Your host is Kit Kaelstow, Wild Spirit Storyteller. Thanks for listening, and now on to the episode. Hello, I'm your host, Kit Kaelstow, and welcome to the second season of the Feathermane Soul Wisdom Show. I've decided to roll us over to the second season now that I've given my website a nice polish and updated some of the back-end technology that should make your experience there much better and make it easier for me to manage everything. And I've also updated the intros and outros just slightly. So I was driving in my car. I listened to podcasts on my way to town. It's about a 30-minute commute to town when I go to get groceries and such. And I was listening to a podcast. And it's a podcast that I kind of have a mostly love relationship with, but sometimes they say things that I'm like, whoa, no, honey, that is not how the universe works. And this was one of those times. I was driving home and their podcast started, and right off the top, they were like, we got off the struggle bus. And first of all, I hate the phrase struggle bus because it implies several things. When you say struggle bus, first of all, a bus is like a small cramped space. You're going somewhere. You don't have autonomy over like where you stop. If there's like 5 bus stops between you and your destination, you're going to stop at all 5 of those because somebody may be waiting to get on the bus. Somebody may need to get off the bus at those stops. But there's a good chance you're going to take momentary pauses or momentary stops at places that don't necessarily serve you. And that's fine. I mean, that's what public transit is for. That's what makes it efficient. So, that's how public transit works. But also, the struggle bus, to me, is a very ableist saying. It brings to mind the buses that are used for students who need extra supports, for students who need specific mobility accommodations to get on and off the bus. It brings to mind the shorter buses that haul fewer students. And that short bus is often used as an ableist slur or insult. And so to me, struggle bus kind of fits into that as well. So, I mean, right off the top, they kind of pinged my sense of justice, my sense of, hey, we don't use those words around here. But also, right after that, the host said something that made me want to scream, frankly. I mean, it was just me and the groceries in the car. I could have screamed if I wanted to. But they were like, well, we stopped focusing on the negative. And so we're doing so much better now that we're attracting more positive things. Oh boy. Here we go again. So I immediately came home, went to my to-do app, and wrote down that the very next podcast I wanted to do was talking about the fallacy of when you think negative, you attract negative things. Now, to put on my psychology hat, there are studies that have been done, and I admit most of the studies I have been presented with, I have concerns about like the methodology and things, and to get, really wonky and in the weeds. But the studies that have been done do show that it's the old pink elephant problem. If you tell somebody not to think about a pink elephant, all they're going to do is think about a pink elephant. But I also think that the focusing on the negative, especially for those of us who are neurodivergent and chronically ill, I think that there's a lot here to discuss and examine about how neurotypical brains work and about how neurodivergent brains work. And I ran into this yesterday. I was having an awesome day. I was doing a bunch of stuff. And the two sides of my neurodivergence, my autism and my ADHD, started fighting one another. The ADHD was just humming right along. I was checking things off my to-do list. I was getting stuff done, feeling productive. I had all the dopamine. I mean, all the dopamine. I was doing great. I was hyper-focusing. And then my autism stuck its hand up and said, "Whoa, you've overwhelmed me. I need to go chill." Luckily, that was towards the end of the day and when I have to go do an evening chore outside. And so, like, I spent the next hour before I went to do those chores basically watching show tunes on YouTube. I mean, I was like totally tuned out. And I, eased into what I was doing in the evenings, and I kind of worked myself out of it. But I think that goes to show you that the neurodivergent brain, and depending on your flavor of neurodivergent brain or your combination of flavors in your neurodivergent brain, that it works differently. And so as somebody with autism and with sensory sensitivities, one of the things that I've really discovered by tuning into my body is that on my high pain days, that's just so overwhelming to my system, and so strong of a sensation that that's all I can focus on. It's like somebody is, walking around behind me with a big megaphone and shouting in my ear. If that were happening to you, that would literally be the only thing you could think about. You'd be like, "Excuse me, could you not do that?" And with the body, it's much the same way. When my body is in really bad pain, which it has been quite a bit, due to some weather situations and the fact that my medical team doesn't really care that I'm in this much pain, then, I do what I can to alleviate it. Just for those who are new to the show, I'm a yoga instructor, so I do yoga, I do meditation, I do breathing, I do mindfulness. I'm really gentle with myself, and I love the practice of self-acceptance. So I do all the things that they say you're supposed to do. But when my body feels like somebody is literally pounding on me with 2x4s, then that's all I can think about. And of course, that's all I'm going to think about. Now, am I attracting more pain by that? You could argue that since I'm focusing and noticing on that maybe in my brain there's something going on there. But the truth of the matter is, my body hurts whether I think about it or not. My body hurts at a variable rate. And so when it hurts less, then I can, I don't think about it as much. Although I still do think, "Oh God, that knee's bothering me," or "Oh, my shoulders hurt so bad." And that's just one small example. When you are dealing with socio-economic things, when you are dealing with financial issues, then, you have to think about them to some extent, because you have to figure out, what's my budget? Do I have any opportunities to try and do a side hustle? Am I using social media effectively to promote my business? There's a million things that you need to think about in relation to your finances And thinking about those things is not going to attract more poverty into your life. In fact, I would argue that thinking about those things is going to make you take more action. Now, if you are referring to the, oh, woe is me, I don't have any money, acknowledging a fact does not attract more facts. I mean, oh, woe is me, I'm in pain. You are allowed to feel upset about the state of your existence. You are allowed to state the truth of that and how that feels to you. And so I think that's the first point I'd like to make, is that when somebody says, oh, only think positive, they are wanting you to deny the truth of your existence for their comfort. And I don't know about you, but as somebody who received my diagnoses very late in life, and has, now reached a point in life where I'm expected to be, basically angry all the time. I don't make myself smaller, deny my existence for other people's comfort. And I don't think you should either. That's part of connecting with our wild spirit. That's part of, connecting with your wild, untamed nature. You're not going to tame down any part of your experience for somebody else's comfort. I also think that we need to think about, and this has come up actually in several things that I have run across over the past couple of weeks, that everybody kind of throws out all these, handy meme worthy things, think positive, get off the struggle bus, do this, do that, without thinking about where all of that came from. And the truth is that all of that positive thinking will change your life. A lot of that came from a guy called Napoleon Hill. I believe that was his name, back in the 20s. So the other thing is, it came out after his death that pretty much everything he said in his book was a lie. He claimed that he, got rich, made all these connections, had this wonderful life because he thought positive and changed the way his mind was going. And he was just a grifter selling some snake oil. Not only did everybody in the 20s buy it, because of course everybody wanted to be a part of the Gilded Age, but people in the decades since have bought it to the point where it's been packaged and repackaged. The Secret, the Law of Attraction, so many things. And so I feel like that the people who tell you that don't quite know the history of it, aren't quite willing to look at the history of it, and aren't quite willing to look at the fact that what they're selling you are the same. It's the same snake oil, just packaged in a more modern packaging. It's like if you look at Coke cans, Coca-Cola. If you look at the cans of Coke, through the decades, the Coke cans that we have now don't look like the Coke cans we had in the 80s, but you still recognize it as Coca-Cola. That sort of thing. And so I think when we do that, we uncover a couple of things. And we uncover some fundamental differences between the neurodivergent brain and the neurotypical brain. And those differences are really about who gets to connect with their wild spirit, who gets to connect with their untamed spirit, and who doesn't for the sake of a neurotypical society. I'm going to take a deep breath here, because I will be honest, maybe it's the perimenopause, but I am reaching the point where this is getting me really angry. Because for me, I could no more tell the storm to calm down for my comfort. I get, thunderstorm rolls in at like 3 o'clock in the morning, big crashes of lightning, big, big booming, reverberating thunder that shakes the house. You wake up, you're like, oh my God, we're going to die. Maybe that's just me. I could no more than like go out on the front porch and be like, excuse me, thunderstorm, could you calm it down? I'm trying to sleep. The storm is going to be like, haha, here's some more thunder and lightning for you, crazy person. And so I want to be the thunderstorm. Not in that I want to, make noise and wake people up, but in that I want to be firm and this is who I am. This is my nature. This is it. And so we could take this down several notches. Squirrels love to raid bird feeders. You can try to do everything you can to squirrel proof your bird feeder. But there's a chance that your squirrel is still going to steal the food out of your bird feeder. The squirrel will find a way. Is it cute? Yeah, it could be. Is it annoying? If you're the one buying the bird seed, probably. But the squirrel is going to squirrel. And we have to accept that. We have to acknowledge that that's the situation. And we can do two things. We can either scream at the squirrel not to squirrel, to which the squirrel is going to pretty much ignore the big screaming monkey on the front porch. And I say monkey because we're primates. And so, theoretically, that's kind of how a lot of nature looks at us. You're going to tire yourself out, stress yourself out, and not change the squirrel's behavior. And with that, you could ignore the squirrel, but the fact is you'd still be spending extra money on bird seed. You would still be, trying to fix the parts of the bird feeder the squirrel broke. The situation would be there even if you tell yourself, well, the squirrel's not raiding my bird feeder. Well, it is. You're just ignoring it and deluding yourself. And so I think that's where when people say, well, don't focus on the bad things without giving you any other context, then they're telling you to delude yourself. They're telling you to ignore the squirrel raiding your bird feeder. They're telling you to, no, it's not thundering and lightning, and there's no severe thunderstorm warning. Just for the record, today it's sunny, but we're in the Midwest. It's spring. We're supposed to get storms in a couple of days. It happens. You could tell yourself that, but if you don't take cover during a severe weather warning, you do risk very serious injury or worse. You do risk getting hurt. And so if you acknowledge the situation, I am in a lot of pain today, or that light is too loud, or my God, I can hear the electricity in this room. I have got to do something about it. Acknowledging the situation is not going to attract more of that situation. My husband and I hate overhead lights. We're both autistic, can you tell? But if he's usually the one that turns on the overhead light to do to clean or something. If he turns on the overhead light and I'm on the bed like going bright light as I'm working on my laptop, like I'm some sort of little Mowgli from the movie or something, then that's not going to make all the other lights in the house turn on and like march and increase the illumination in the room I'm in. That's simply an acknowledgement that, hey, you turned on the light. I hope you had a good reason. And obviously we communicate better than that. Once you have that acknowledgement, you can then figure out what to do to fix it. That might be on a high pain day, giving yourself grace and saying, you know what, my body hurts today. I can't do what I wanted to do. I'm going to curl up with a blanket, a book, the favorite show I'm streaming, whatever makes you feel better. If it is the case of like bad sensory inputs in a room, it's going to be, you know, hey, can you turn the light off? That's really hurting my eyes right now. Or, you know, is this going to be quick? Usually in our case, it's like, you know, if it's not obvious, I'm like, why did you do that? He tells me, and I'm like, okay, make it quick. Acknowledging it, and even, you know, even if you're groaning and, you know, growling about it the entire time, you can still do that. You can still understand the situation is what it is, and you can still do what you need to do to make any changes. There's a big difference between working through the situation as it is, working to find a better place, and just completely deluding yourself that the situation doesn't exist at all. And the other thing is, notice that even with like the sensory issue, there's a two-way communication. And this is the other part that really got me when I was listening to this podcast. So it is a spiritual, metaphysical podcast. They talk a lot about New Age style topics. They do teach classes. I suppose people could turn to this podcast for a guru, and you've got to be mindful of that. I mean, if you're putting yourself in a position where you're teaching people, you need to be mindful that if you're teaching people, people will do what you say. Hopefully, maybe, or at least they'll consider it. You know, I mean, I don't want to be all authoritarian because that's not the case. I really encourage people who listen to this podcast and who take my classes and that to try, you know, have a curious mind. That's all I ask. And the tone of this basically was, if you don't stop thinking about whatever is a pain point in your life, if you don't stop focusing on that, nothing is going to change. You're only going to attract more, and it's going to be your fault. It's the last part that really got me. It's going to be your fault. Hello, victim blaming has entered the chat. And so with that victim blaming, that's a whole new layer of not good. Because there are so many things that go into even what appears to be a cut and dried situation. So for those of us who are neurodivergent and have a chronic illness, the easy knee-jerk thing to do, you have diabetes, you're clearly not eating right. You know, whether it's a medical provider or somebody nothing, it's all on you. Oh, you have chronic pain and you're not losing weight. Well, that's your fault. That is their way, again, of making themselves feel better and absolving themselves of all responsibility. But more importantly, they're basically absolving the socio-economic cultural systems of all their responsibility too. I just got done writing an essay talking about how being chronically ill really connects us with this planet, which many would argue is chronically ill right now, dealing with climate change and just the weird things going on with the weather and that. And, you know, one of the points I made was that, okay, a single tree in the forest has to take in nutrients, water, air, all of that good stuff to survive. And so to some respect, it is on that tree to do that. However, that tree is affected by all the other trees in the forest. And whether that's, a little forest like the one I have in my backyard, that's kind of a little buffer zone between us and the properties around us, or whether it's, thousands and thousands of acres like the Mark Twain National Forest or any national forest that, you know, is in the U.S. I happen to live in the Ozarks. There is quite a bit of the Mark Twain National Forest not too far from where I live. Acres and acres and acres and acres of trees. But even something as big as a section of the national forest, and in the case of the Mark Twain National Forest, it's actually several large forests in a very vast geographic area. It's not just like one national park. There's a whole bunch of little pieces of it scattered throughout the Ozarks. But those little pieces are, many thousands of acres. And, the health of that is based in some respects to the land around it and what the people do. I'm thinking about like the emerald ash borer, I think its name was. When it first showed up in Iowa, all of a sudden it was like, okay, you can't bring in your own firewood. You need to buy it only from authorized dealers, because people bringing in firewood from other states moved this pest across state lines and brought it into Iowa, where it really proliferated. When we think about the invasive species here, the invasive species that we have came over from long distances and in ways that like people didn't even notice. If you're dealing with an invasive species, you're dealing with something that somebody basically either thought was good that they introduced into an ecosystem, or that they didn't even know was there. And then all of a sudden you got this big problem. You can't blame, for example, the ash tree for its emerald borer infestation without actually looking at all the other factors. And, the people moving firewood, how did this pest originally get into the U.S.? There's so many factors. And I don't say this as a neurodivergent tangent. I say this because it connects with our thoughts. If I'm having a bad pain day, okay, yes, in this moment, I have pain signals going to my brain, or I have signals going to my brain that my brain's interpreting as pain, and they're localized in various parts of my body. I could catalog them. You guys probably aren't interested in that. I wouldn't be if I was listening to this podcast. And they're different sensations, and they're caused by different things. But all of that is connected to other things that happen that are connected to things that go back, 50 years. Because that's how old I am. And that all those experiences have built to this moment. And so for me to just say, oh, well, I'm not in pain today, doesn't do anything to address the 50 years of damage that has been done to my body and nervous system by various factors, including people who did not want to see that I was neurodivergent, or who did not want to believe my lived experiences around some trauma that I experienced. And so, I always believe that when you blame the person, that's the coward's way out. That's the cop out. Even now, like with our political situation, you can tell somebody, hey, your vote caused this to happen, but then you have to look at why the people voted that way, what caused it. And that goes back decades, and it's so much wider than just going, haha, you voted for this, now you're getting hurt. That's probably another show. Maybe not, but everything is connected. And that to me, that's what my autistic brain has taught me. Everything is connected. Patterns upon patterns upon patterns upon patterns. And when you start to put those patterns together, which is not something that neurotypical people tend to do, they tend to think a little more superficially about things, because that's what works for them and for their neurotype. Then you have to think about everything that's going on, and suddenly it's not as easy as stop thinking negative, get off the struggle bus. Because in order to do that, you would have to go back and fix decades and centuries of systemic oppression and systemic issues. You would have to completely rethink entire systems that are invested in keeping themselves going. And you would have to be willing to extend grace and extend caring to people that you might not want to extend caring and grace to because they're different from you. I feel like I've rambled a bit. I also feel like I got into some really juicy, good stuff. So if you are listening to this, I am curious to hear your thoughts. Drop me a comment. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Feathermane Soul Wisdom Show. You've been listening to the Feathermane Soul Wisdom podcast, hosted by Kit Kelstow. Learn more about Feathermane Soul at feathermanesoul.com. As a wild spirit storyteller, Kit is passionate about helping those who are neurodivergent, disabled, or living with chronic illness rediscover their own inner wild spirit. Visit feathermanesoul.com to receive free gifts or book a free call with Kit to discuss how wild spirit storytelling can help you. Music is Running with the Horses by Purple Planet Music. This podcast is hosted on the Muse Charmer Media Network. Find out more by visiting feathermanesoul.com/show and following the links to the Muse Charmer Network. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow wherever you're hearing my voice, or tell a friend who may be interested. Thank you.